So, welcome to our regular Thursday inspiring slot with the fabulous Eric. And we are here, wow, indeed. We are here for the next 45 minutes on YouTube and then 15 minutes on our Facebook group, Inspiring People, to find out a bit more about Eric, to find out what inspires him and really how he inspires others.
All right. I hope you're not asking me that question because I don't know if I could give you an answer that would be relevant.
Right. Okay. So the first question I need to ask you, Eric, is tell us your 101. Tell us some facts about you.
Oh, well, I'm a Vietnam veteran.
Mm-hmm.
I was married for 30 years. We have an awesome son who's like 38 years old now, who has 3 wonderful children. So I'm a grandfather. I worked in aerospace for almost 20 years and retired 5-6 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in being here now, which is Ram Dass's book that he wrote back in the 70s. And he just recently passed away, I see. But that was what inspired me to get into this breathwork stuff.
So it was Ram Dass that inspired you?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, I'd have to say being here now, being in the present moment is been my intention for many years.
Mm-hmm.
And breathwork, as you know, does facilitate that present moment awareness.
Sure. So can you tell me about that moment when you discovered Ram Dass, or when you read his book, or where you were in your life at that time?
Yeah, it was back in the 70s. I was a kind of a hippie, kind of standing on the street with signs about the war that I know was not right. And I was kind of an alternate lifestyle kind of person. I lived out in the land for a while and moved to California and hitchhiked around. And I think when I discovered his book, I was in some bookstore in California somewhere, and I saw "Be Here Now," and something just grabbed me, so I picked it up and I started reading it. And that was the start of my kind of career into presence.
Mm-hmm. That sounds quite a big moment, actually. And first of all, I have to say, sort of California in the 1970s and being a hippie, hitchhiking around is something that's a sort of almost legendary, for many people. That's when it all really started. Perhaps you could give us a flavor of what life was like back in the 1970s as a hippie in California. I'd love to have been there.
Well, when I got out of the military, I was in one of the last jobs I had in the military was a newspaper writer, and the editor of the newspaper that I wrote for at Fort Meade, Maryland, him and we got to be buds, and he asked me if I wanted to go to California after the military, and I said, yeah, sure. So I hitchhiked down to Florida, and we drove across country, and then I didn't have a car, so hitchhiking was the only way I had to get around. And I used to hitchhike to Laguna Beach from Huntington Beach about 3 or 4 times a week and just hang out on the beach with other hippies, smoking pot and singing songs and all that stuff. And it was kind of an idyllic lifestyle back then. So that's where I first got into this stuff about being here now and being in the moment and how important that was.
Perhaps you could then take us back to that moment where you found the book and when it spoke to you, and tell us the kind of impact that it had on your life when you read that, and what can you remember from the book back then and how it impacted you?
Well, I remember picking the book up and it said, "Be Here Now." And I thought, well, where in the hell else am I? And then I started realizing, oh, my mind is all over the place. I'm thinking about the future and stressed out over something that may have happened in the past. And I realized that, is that no noise coming from me or you?
I think it's coming from me. I think there's some kind of wild animal outside,
Oh, okay, okay.
like a
So
Star Wars
yeah,
a mammoth or something, ice
yeah,
mammoth.
a big Yoda. Okay, so I realized I kind of got the idea. It kind of clicked that the present moment is really all we have, and that's where I needed to be. And that felt so radical at that time because everybody I talked to, they were talking about, oh, how screwed up things were yesterday, and maybe tomorrow things will be better, and this and that. And I thought, holy shit, yeah, I get into that stuff too, and I realized what a waste of our time that is, thinking about the past and the future, and knowing that the present moment is all we have. So I guess the book really connected with me at a really deep level, even deeper than I could consciously connect with at the time. And the more I studied it, the more I realized how important it is to be here now. And the more I studied other philosophies like Buddhism and things like that, they all talk about being in the moment. So I realized how important that is. And it wasn't until much later that breathwork found me, and I realized that breathwork really is the major tool for being in the moment. So
It really is. It will take you there like
yeah,
nothing else that I've ever experienced.
exactly.
Before we get to the breathwork, though, okay, so we've got you with Be Here Now in the 1970s, being a hippie, living this idyllic lifestyle. What happened then after that, in the 80s and 90s for you? Tell us about your life then.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's see, what did I do? I hitchhiked back to Ohio where I grew up. I was born in New York City, grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. I hitchhiked back to that area, and I got into the motorcycle stuff for some reason. I can't even remember how that happened, but I got interested in motorcycles, and I worked at a bike shop, and I built motorcycles and just had fun riding around and stuff. And I met this girl, and we got married, and that was like back in early days. I can't remember the date, but we rode around a lot. And one thing I do remember is when I was with another group of bikers, we were down in Columbus, Ohio, raising hell in the street, and the cops took us out to the border of Columbus and told us not to come back. So I remember those days, and yeah, there was a lot of motorcycle stuff, and so I went from the hippie world to the motorcycle world, and then into the engineering world when I got my job in aerospace, and I was in electronics for most of my career. So I hope that helps.
It does. It's good to kind of build a picture of you. So, and obviously you got married then, and you had a family. And
Your sound is stopped.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So you obviously, after being a hippie and a motorcycle rider, you settled down into a career job, and you raised a family.
Yes.
And then, yeah, are there any points about that period in your life then, say before you discovered breathwork, that you think might be interesting for me or anyone else to know about you?
Well, I think you pretty much nailed it. I was in a partnership with my then wife, and we raised our son, and we did the best we could, obviously. And it was interesting when he was born. The doctors wanted to circumcise him because that was the normal thing that they did to male children. And I remember my then wife said, "No, we're not going to circumcise him." And I had zero one way or the other opinions on that until I started researching it. And it turns out she was so right. That was such a waste, and I'm glad we did not circumcise my son, our son. So he grew up happy and dandy and has his own children now and a great wife, and he's in the entertainment industry in California and lives in Los Angeles area. And but that was a big chapter in my life, just being married. And then I was working at an aerospace company for most of that time, and I'd go to work and come home, and my then wife was homeschooling him and doing all sorts of great things for him. So that was that chapter of my life. Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the next chapter then. Is that when you retired, do you think, or when you discovered breath work?
Yeah, I think it was when I retired and I realized I didn't really want to be married and I wanted to be on my own again. So I got out of the marriage, and a friend of mine who I met out in California introduced me to breathwork. And this was not so long ago. This was back in 2014. And I remember we met in a park in California, in Southern California, and I could not believe the effects that it had on me, the physical effects. I had done, when I was younger, I had done a lot of LSD and smoking weed and stuff like that. But this breath work had such an impact on my body. I just was tingling and had all these visions, and I felt like I was levitating, and it was incredible. And I knew right then that that's what I was getting moved into. So in that park, I discovered it. I realized that breathwork had discovered me. So then I moved into training. I got trained in 2 different styles of breathwork. I got certified, and now I'm doing other trainings, and I'm learning a lot about breathwork. And I'm never at a loss for how amazing breathwork is. And like I'm sure.
Well, your story just like resonates with me because that is my story. And I know for anyone watching this who has done breath work, it will be the same story. Within, just a few breaths of my first ever breath work, I was, holy shit, all the meditation, all the yoga, everything I've done before, that's gone out the window. Now I've discovered what I need to do next.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm really interested in the 2 schools of breathwork training that you've undertaken. Tell me a bit about them.
Okay. Well, the lady that took me on my first breathwork journey had studied breathwork under a teacher named David Elliott, who was based in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and he had trained. The other thing is I started going to Bhakti and Shakti Fest in Joshua Tree, California, because I got into yoga and kirtan and singing and stuff. And it turns out that David Elliott's, one of his students, was a huge breathwork person at Shakti and Bhakti Fest, and his name was Michael Brian Baker. And I just had to learn all this breathwork from this David Elliott guy. So I studied with him, and then I met Dana Dharma DeLong and Ashana Solaris, who had a different style of breathwork. Theirs is mainly a rebirthing style of breathwork. I guess they studied under Leonard Orr's school of breathwork. So I went through their training and got certified in that. So I'm certified in those 2 trainings, David Elliott's and Dana Dharma DeLong and Ashana Solaris, clarity breathwork. And I've been studying ever since, and I find different breathwork styles. And I like Buteyko, I had to learn how that worked. And there's just, as you know, there's so many different styles of breathwork, and they all have advantages. So, and there was the nose versus mouth and music versus no music. Oh yeah, I did a number of holotropic sessions. I went through I finished most of the training of transformational breath. And I read her book, the Judith Kravitz, and saw a lot of her videos and went to a number of her type of sessions done by other people, and I just can't get enough of this breathwork stuff. So I'm continuing.
That's an awful lot of studying you've done, Eric.
Yeah.
Amazing. And my teacher, Anthony, from Alchemy of Breath, he trained with Dana and Ashana as well with Clarity Breathwork. So there's a lot of influence with that in my learning as well. Okay. So really you have so much experience and knowledge and practice. I think my next question is, so what do you do now? Do you facilitate down where you are in Arizona? Tell us about what your practice or what your offerings are down there right now.
Yeah, I have been facilitating here. I started teaching a weekly breathwork class at a yoga studio in Gilbert when I first got here. And it seemed like when I was talking to this lady that owns the studio, and I told her that I've studied under David Elliott and who taught Michael Brian Baker, she got really excited and she says, can you come here and teach a class? And I said, sure. So I taught a class there for about 1.5 years, and then I started teaching up in Scottsdale, Arizona, a weekly class. And then I started doing a lot of traveling because I had some family issues in California. So I gave up my classes, and now I'm doing breathwork kind of workshops. And we have one coming up next Monday. And in fact, there's one today I was asked to do for about 30 people up in Cave Creek, California, which is north of Scottsdale. So I am continuing to teach and learn. And I haven't stopped.
That's inspirational in itself, actually, because I really believe that learning is a lifelong process, and something I learned from my mother. She never stopped learning, never stops. I don't think I have any people subscribe from Arizona, Eric, but if they do watch this, then I hope that they come and seek you out. So, okay, I'm starting to get a bit of a picture of who you are now. So from your trainings that you've taken and what you have learned with the masters that you've studied under, what would a couple of lessons or the important things that you would say to people about breathwork? What are the kind of, some takeaways that people can have? What is it? Why is it powerful? What have you got from it? What will be your big, 30-second, minute elevator pitch about why this practice is so powerful?
Well, the first thing I like to suggest to people is that every facilitator is unique, and they all have a different energy about them. They all bring out different things. However, I think the most important part of breathwork is consciously connecting it, no matter if you breathe in through your nose or your mouth. Full and deep breath. I believe that most people don't breathe deep enough in the world, and breathwork is so powerful to help open up people's breathing cavity in their body. And I believe we can heal. I believe we have our inner healer, which is turned on by our parasympathetic nervous system. So there's so many parts of it, and the vagus nerve and all that stuff, comes into this breath work. And then I'm also a heart math facilitator, and I learned how important heart rate variability is and how we can influence it with our breath patterns. So there's so much. Yeah. Does that help?
I think so. I think so. Okay, I'm going to ask you some maybe shorter questions. That these ones maybe make you think a bit more. And at the end of the interview, I'm going to ask you some questions for our next, if you've got some questions for our next interview as well. So what do you think is worth dying for, and what is worth living for?
Yeah, good question. First of all, I don't believe we really die. I believe that we may shed our skins in this life, in this place we're in. So I don't believe that we die. However, I think that doing whatever we believe is in our heart is correct. If we go to a place where that causes our body to release itself from us, I think it's worth it. And I think in the bigger picture, there's no end to it all. So I know that sounds kind of confusing, maybe.
So, what is worth living for? Going to that heart space.
Yeah, the heart space, I believe, is the place where we can be coming from love and staying in that place of our heart. I believe is the reason that we're here, and the best thing we can do to be love and spread love around into this place. So I guess I'm going back to sound like my hippie days.
I was just about to say the same thing, actually, Eric. Okay, well, there's the other half of that question is what is worth dying for, or perhaps shedding this skin for, as you put it.
Yeah, I believe that once we realize what power we have in this place, and if there comes a time where we have to give up this skin to move ahead with that idea, I think that's perfectly fine. I think it's a great example for others that there's nothing at all worth being scared over or being confused over, that we can be in our hearts all the time. And if something like the place we're in, I know some people have an issue with this place, and with politics and finances and all that stuff. But I think that we don't want to ever give up our connection to our heart and our higher self. So that's worth dying for.
Okay, our connection to ourselves. Okay, great. What compliment would you most like people to say about you?
Oh God, that's a great question. I guess if they said that guy's real, that would be the biggest compliment I could. Wow, thank you.
Well, Eric, you're real.
And I got to tell you, Benedict, the breathwork you did that was based on that Rudyard Kipling poem, that was life changing for me. I ended up sending an email to my son and telling him about that poem and how impactful that was, and just the fact that you did that in the breathwork session was so amazing. I had never experienced that before. So.
No, I hadn't either. I've never heard of anyone reciting poetry during a breath work. I didn't know if it would work, but it was that line in there. If you can treat victory and defeat and treat those imposters just the same, it was that line that inspired me.
Yeah.
That was the subject for that breath work.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I met Anthony at Joshua Tree at the International Breast Forum IBF meeting last year. Yeah, I met him in person. I've been to a number of his online events. I love them. On Sunday morning, Breathe the World. I think that is such an awesome philosophical concept, and the way he pulls it off is so beautiful.
He does it. Anthony is he's what inspired me. He was the first person that introduced me to breathwork. And studying with him was an absolute joy and a pleasure. So if you're watching this, that is Alchemy of Breath, and every Sunday they do 2 sessions called Breathe the World. I really encourage you to check those out. Okay, well, Eric, you are definitely real, and and the other compliments I'd like to give you, you are definitely here right now.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's being present is like my whole point. Yay.
Okay. So there's a flip side to that question as well. What criticism do you least like to be said about you?
Oh, I'm getting better about receiving criticisms, because I'm realizing that everybody's doing their best, and I can forgive everyone because they know not what they do, to quote some other person that is reported to have said that. So I like to think that I can deflect criticism like water off a duck's back. I have never been criticized that intently where it affected me, so that might be a new thing for me to deal with. I don't know.
It's a fascinating question, actually, and it is something I love. And when I'm facilitating, I almost prefer criticism, and people telling me they hate me and all those negative things, because there's more juice in that.
Okay.
Really.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay. Who would you like holding your hand when you die, Eric?
Oh, wow. Whew. I guess the first person that comes to my mind is our son. Yeah, I think if I could have my son there with me when I pass from this life, that would be very, very wonderful.
Have you been with many people as they've passed or as they've transitioned?
I have not. I have heard stories. My mother transitioned in 2010, and her and I had a really great relationship, and we still do. And I heard many wonderful things from the people that were in attendance to her when she passed. And they said it was an honor to see her go. And I would love to have the same thing said about me when I pass from this time space that I'm in.
It is one of the most extraordinary moments and the greatest privilege to be able to be with someone, especially when you love them.
Yeah.
And they have something close for you. That's just hit me, actually, about your son, and that might be a difficult thing to ask a child to be with you when you pass.
Yeah.
But it is, if you have the strength to ask them to be there, then it's an amazing gift to them.
I think so. And I think about that Rudyard Kipling poem and like the line about the two imposters in there. And wow, if we could relay that to our children, the world will become a better place than it is now.
Okay. So I don't know if you believe in reincarnation, but just in case you did, what was the one thing that you would like to remember from this life?
I think it was just the discovery of the be here now concept. And I do believe in reincarnation. I believe, in fact, when I was up in Sedona a couple of years ago, I had a download that I'd been in the military for a lot of my previous lives. And I was asked to start doing Ho'oponopono on all the victims of conflict in the world. So, yeah, it's a good question, Benedict. Yeah.
So that's the book, just the discovery of the book. And I suppose the title says it all. That's the lesson that you would like to remember.
To be here now? Yeah, be here now. And that's all there is the moments that we live in. Yeah.
Okay. So if you had one year of your life completely free of commitments, and maybe being retired now, you don't have so many commitments, but there are still family commitments. But if you had 1 year completely free of commitments, what is it that you would do?
This girl that I am with at this moment wants to go to Egypt, and I really feel led to go to Egypt with her. She's been there before. So I really want to go to Egypt and just be there and see how it feels. I believe I was there before. And so that's one thing I would do. And I don't have any commitments, actually. I don't even have any class commitments. I'm pretty free. So I can do that.
So you're feeling a real draw to go to Egypt?
Yes.
On the land there. That will be interesting.
Yes.
I'm a real history nut, and I really love being in places and love feeling places where people have been walking for millennia or hundreds or thousands of years, and I feel that energy. So that'll be really fascinating to find out what you experience in that. Will you come back and tell us about it afterwards?
Of course, if I'm still alive, if time stays, I will.
Okay. Can you think of an emotional incident in your life, something that has changed you? And I wondered if you'd like to share that.
Yeah, I think the big one was my father left me when I was 3. He passed away, and in a breath session about a few months ago, it came to me that he really didn't leave me. He was supporting me my whole life, and being with me and opening doors for me, because my life is like a miracle. All the things that have happened to me, and so I think that the moment when I realized that my father had never left me was so emotional, that's probably the biggest emotional moment in my life.
The realization that your father never left you,
Right.
that he was with you all the time.
Yes. Opening doors.
And do you still feel that?
Yes. Yes.
Can you
Yeah.
tell us about him?
Well, he was an engineer in New York City, and this was back in the late 40s and early 50s. And I remember my mother telling me that we had the first television set in New York. He built it himself. And people used to come to our apartment and watch these sporting events on television because nobody had a TV. But my father was a TV engineer. And by the way, he never went to school for it. He kind of picked it up on his own, which is the way I picked up electronics, was kind of on my own. So it's like a family history thing. And my son is the same way. He's in entertainment. He never trained for that. He just quit school and started working. And so, yeah, that connection with my father and my mother are really close. They're both passed, and I still feel them both daily.
That's lovely. Do you feel the same way with your mother? Is she still with you?
Yeah, my mother, I talk to her a lot. I thank her for all the love that she gave my sister and myself. And even though she lost her husband when I was just 3 years old, she never gave up, and she always trusted that life would work out. And she taught my sister and I that life always works out. We can just relax and trust. And that's the biggest lesson I believe I ever got from my mother, who I loved. And she loved us both so much. So I'm very fortunate to have that background.
To relax and trust.
Yeah.
I'm just interested, like, is there a way that you can drop in and feel them or heal them or know that they're there?
I just start talking to them and thank them. I know lately I've been eating foods that my mother made. My mother was a great cook, and she used to make specialty foods like Swedish pancakes and fried eggs with the yolks soft. And I find that when I eat food, and I'm a vegan now, so that both of those foods are typically off my list, but I still fall back into that pattern of eating that food and thinking of her when I do. So yeah, and I thank her for all her love.
What were their names, Eric?
My mother's name was Elizabeth, and my father's name is Charles.
Is it okay if we just take a couple of breaths for Elizabeth and Charles, because I can kind of feel them here and I feel them here in you. So I'd really just like to acknowledge and honor that, if that's okay.
Yeah, well, totally.
Can you feel them with you right now?
Yes.
What would they be saying to you?
They'd be saying, "Thank you, son. I love you, and you're awesome. Yay."
Yeah, I can feel that as well, Eric. It feels almost like I could almost see them in the room behind you.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
So, okay, well, thank you for bringing those guys, your parents in with us today. That's remarkably powerful to have them here with us. Thank you, and I want to just honour that again.
Thank you.
Maybe we should bring in your son as
Sure.
well. Tell us a little bit about him. Tell us about your relationship with him.
Well, it's a challenging relationship right at the moment. My son and I, we were tight and close his whole life. I was there for him when he was born. I was in the delivery room with him. He was a sports guy in high school, and I went to every football and basketball game that I could. So I was with him his whole life. And then just like a couple of years ago, his mother, my former wife, she had a stroke while living with him, and that was like a train wreck in my family, and he had an issue with that, and we're not talking now because of that. So, and I've reached out to him and tell him I love him and it's fine, whatever he wants to do. So I know that he'll come around and connect with me again. His mother still doesn't talk. She had a major stroke while living with him and his wife and his children. She was helping their family, which was really awesome. And my son was in the military. He was in the Iraq conflict, and he came back with PTSD, huge PTSD, bigger than I did and received when I was in Vietnam. And but he's an awesome young man. He's in entertainment, and they love him. Apparently, from what my former wife said, whenever he was working, she was there working, witnessing him while he was working, and she said that everybody around really loves my son and respects him, and is happy to have him in their midst for his support and his leadership. So he has a great reputation at what he does, and he's been to the Arctic, and he's been on all sorts of shows, wrestling shows, and he's an awesome guy. So hope that helps paint a brief picture of him.
Does it help you talking about it and talking about your relationship?
Yeah, it does actually. I love him, and I will never stop loving him. And even though we are strained at the moment, I know that that'll change, and I'm doing everything I can to bring that back together. And yeah, so I don't know what happened. It just crashed between us when my former wife had her stroke and couldn't talk anymore, and it just changed everything. So,
well, let's just maybe acknowledge that as well, and all the joy and all the pain that goes with having children and raising children and letting them go as well.
yeah, totally.
So okay to take a breath with that too.
Yeah, just do that.
So going from that place of vulnerability and stepping from suffering and into the wisdom that gives you, because you've lived a life, Eric. I know already from being in the military, and the things that you just talked about a little bit about this evening. What life advice would you give people? If there is something that you could pass on to people here, what would that life advice be to people?
Yeah, my life advice would be connect with your heart and realize that everything will work out perfectly if you stay in your heart and love everyone. And everything that people come up and bring you is a messenger of what you have inside that needs to be healed.
So connect with your heart, trust everything will be all right.
Yes.
And everyone who comes to you is a messenger of some kind.
Yes.
That's a pretty good message, actually, Eric.
Great.
A little bit 1970s hippie, but
Yeah. Well, that's my base.
there's so much more I would like to talk to you about. I'd love to hear about, because you were in the military, you said, before we started in the hippie stage of your life.
Yeah. I was in the 60s. I was in the military. 67, 68. I was in Vietnam.
Would you maybe just briefly like to tell us about your experiences there, or how that changed or affected you?
Yeah, well, I was not in combat. I was a truck driver. I was a welder. I did all sorts of, I was a steam cleaner in a junkyard over there. I did all sorts of stuff, did not shoot anybody. And I realized, and I got the message later that I wasn't allowed to be in combat because I had taken a vow of nonviolence in a previous life. So I had no idea about this then, but I just got that when I was in Sedona a few years ago. So, yeah, but that was challenging being over in Vietnam. And I do have some physical issues that came as a result of that. Like I lost all the hair on my legs, and I thank Monsanto for their Agent Orange that caused, I believe that caused that. I'm just guessing, but and I was blessed in the military. I did a lot of different jobs. I was a photographer, a writer, and I did all sorts of stuff in the military.
That sounds like an experience that could have been, that was better than many people have had, in the 1960s, and probably better than your son had as well.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. Yeah, he was in special forces when he was in. So he trained with the Marine Recon, Army Rangers, Police SWAT. He did all sorts of highly secure and highly dangerous missions when he was in the Coast Guard.
Okay, there's a lot of energy here, Eric. I can really feel that. And I really, thank you for allowing us to go a little bit deeper than just a normal kind of interview questions.
Yeah.
So we're gonna, in a second, we'll stay in this room, but we're gonna start streaming onto Facebook.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask some questions, particularly about inspiration, about what inspired you when you were young, about what inspires you now, and also what would you like to inspire in others as well, before we round up. So just to maybe bring this portion of the interview to a close, let's just take 3 breaths together. And Eric, thank you for being on here today.
Thank you, Benedict, for what you've done and what you're doing. It's great. We need more breath workers in the world.
We do.
Thanks for stepping up.
We do. Okay. Thank you, Eric.